Shanghai, August 1937. The city burns. Buildings crumble beneath roaring bombs. The sky glows orange, the streets echo with screams, and the mighty Yangtze River runs red with blood. This isn't Europe. It isn't 1941. This is Shanghai, the glittering jewel of the East. And it has just become the first true battlefield of the modern age. Before Pearl Harbor. Before Hitler's tanks rolled into Poland. Before the Blitz, the Holocaust, and the mushroom clouds. The Second World War was already burning here, in the heart of China, and it all began, almost absurdly, with one missing soldier. On the humid night of July 7, 1937, Japanese troops stationed near Beijing were carrying out what they called night exercises near the ancient Marco Polo Bridge. The tension between Japanese occupiers and Chinese forces had been building for years. But that night, a few gunshots shattered the uneasy calm. When roll call was taken, one Japanese soldier was missing. Colonel Renya Mutaguchi, a man known for his impulsive temper, panicked. He accused the nearby Chinese garrison of kidnapping his man. Within hours, he ordered his artillery to open fire on Chinese positions. By dawn, smoke curled over the bridge, and the war that would devastate Asia had begun. The missing soldier soon returned. He had simply gotten lost in the dark. But it didn't matter anymore. The bullets fired that night could never be taken back. What followed was the full-scale eruption of the Second Sino-Japanese War. A conflict that would claim more than 20 million lives and drag the entire world toward global war. Japan's ambitions had been swelling for years. After the Meiji Restoration, it transformed from a feudal island nation into a modern industrial empire. Its leaders believed Japan had a divine mission: to lead Asia, to dominate its neighbors, and to seize the resources it lacked. By 1931, Japan had already seized Manchuria, setting up a puppet state called Manchukuo under the boy Emperor Poye, the last ruler of China's Qing dynasty. The League of Nations condemned the act. Japan simply walked out. Now, Tokyo's generals looked south, to the vast, resource-rich lands of China itself. They saw a weak, divided nation, still reeling from civil wars, corruption, and foreign control. In their eyes, conquering China would cement Japan as the master of Asia. China's leader, Chiang Kai-shek, had been humiliated once before when Japan took Manchuria. He vowed it would not happen again. If we must die, he told his commanders, let it be in defense of our nation's dignity. His generals warned him, if war breaks out, both sides will bleed to death. But Chiang cared more about honor than survival. He knew he could not stop Japan's army in the north. So he made a bold decision. He would take the fight south to Shanghai, China's beating heart, the most international city in Asia. In 1937, Shanghai was unlike any place in the East. It was a metropolis of 1,000 contrasts, where rickshaws clattered past Bix and Chinese coolies worked under neon signs advertising Western brands. There were British banks, American hotels, French cafes, and even Russian nightclubs. Within its international settlement, the laws of China did not apply. The city was a symbol of modernity and of humiliation. Chiang believed if Japan attacked here, among Western interests, the world would be forced to intervene. If the bombs fell near British and American businesses, surely the great powers would take notice. It was a desperate gamble, one that would cost hundreds of thousands of lives. On August 13, 1937, gunfire erupted in the city's suburbs. Within hours, Japanese warships anchored in the Yanks opened fire. Shanghai, the Pearl of the Orient, became hell on earth. Tens of thousands of civilians flooded toward the international settlement, clutching children and what little they could carry. They believed foreign flags would protect them. They were wrong. In the chaos, Chinese bombers attempted to strike a Japanese cruiser docked on the river. They missed. Their bombs fell instead into Shanghai's crowded business district. In seconds, the bustling streets became an inferno. Trams burned, storefronts shattered. The air filled with screams. A foreign journalist wrote, "Flames from a blazing car played over distorted bodies. Hands, legs, arms lay far from smashed masses of flesh. The corpse of a policeman lay where he had stood directing traffic." Over 1,000 civilians died, locals and foreigners alike. It became known as Black Saturday. The world was horrified, but no one intervened. Shanghai descended into madness. By September, more than 1 million troops were locked in the most brutal urban battle the world had yet seen. 750,000 Chinese and 250,000 Japanese. The city became a maze of death. Snipers hid in church towers. Flamethrowers turned alleyways into furnaces. Districts flattened under Japanese artillery. Civilians huddled in basements as fighter planes screamed overhead. Hospitals overflowed. The smell of death clung to every street. The Japanese deployed poison gas, heavy tanks, and dive bombers. The Chinese fought with grenades, rifles, and bayonets, often charging until entire battalions were wiped out. A Japanese officer, stunned by the resistance, wrote in his diary, "We viewed China as a dog. It now emerges as a wolf." For 3 relentless months, the two sides battled house to house. Every inch of ground was paid for with blood. By November, Shanghai was rubble. The Chinese defenders, exhausted and decimated, finally began to retreat. Chiang Kai-shek's elite German, trained divisions, his proudest army, were shattered. 70% of his officers were dead or captured. As Japanese troops marched through the smoldering ruins, foreign reporters described a city unrecognizable. Corpses lay unburied on the Bund. Smoke drifted from the gutted skyline. One Western observer called it the Chinese Stalingrad. Before Stalingrad ever happened. But amid the ashes, something extraordinary happened. For the first time in generations, the Chinese people began to unite. Songs of resistance spread through refugee camps. One of them, the March of the Volunteers, would later become China's national anthem. The Japanese commanders, meanwhile, gathered to celebrate victory. But some among them were uneasy. Their troops were exhausted, their supplies strained, and the battle had cost them dearly. General Owain Matsui, however, believed he could end the war with one decisive blow. His new target, Nanjing, China's capital. As winter closed in, Japan's army, 200,000 men strong, marched west from Shanghai. The cities and villages along their path were left in ruins. Civilians were bayoneted for sport. Prisoners were used for bayonet practice. Rivers ran thick with the bodies of the dead. Inside Nanjing, panic reigned. The Chinese government fled inland to Chongqing, leaving behind 75,000 defenders, many barefoot and starving. Their commander, Tang Shengji, knew the situation was hopeless, but he had orders to resist. On December 8, 1937, the Japanese assault began. Within days, the ancient capital fell. What followed was not victory. It was vengeance. For 6 endless weeks, the city was turned into a slaughterhouse. Captured Chinese soldiers, tens of thousands of them, were tied together and machine-gunned by the river. Others were forced to dig their own graves before being bayoneted. Civilians were dragged from their homes, robbed, and murdered. Women, even children, were raped in front of their families. One Japanese soldier later confessed, "I figured I'd never get another chance like this, so I stabbed 30 of them. Old folks, kids. It didn't matter. I felt like a devil slayer." A few foreigners within the Nanjing safety zone, such as German businessman John Rabe, risked their lives to shelter civilians. He wrote to Berlin, begging for help. None came. When the killing finally stopped, between 100,000 and 300,000 people lay dead. The world would remember it as the Rape of Nanjing, one of humanity's darkest chapters. News of the atrocities reached the West through missionaries and journalists. Photographs of rivers choked with corpses appeared in newspapers. The reports were undeniable. Yet the world did nothing. The United States and Britain issued mild condemnations but continued to trade with Japan. The League of Nations, already crippled by inaction in Ethiopia and Spain, remained silent. Only one nation acted: the Soviet Union, which sent aircraft, tanks, and military advisors to aid China's fight. But Japan seemed unstoppable. By early 1938, it controlled much of China's coast and major cities. Still, the Chinese refused to surrender. The empire that believed it would conquer China in months found itself trapped in a war without end. As the conflict dragged on, Japan sank deeper into the quagmire. Its army consumed 90% of the national budget. Millions of young men were shipped to China, never to return. The brutality hardened on both sides. In desperation, Japanese scientists began experimenting with biological weapons. Unit 731's horrors of vivisection, plague bombs, and human experimentation would remain one of history's most chilling secrets. Meanwhile, Chiang Kai-shek's government retreated inland, continuing a stubborn resistance aided by American pilots and Soviet advisors. The struggle became one of survival, for a nation and for its soul. In 1939, as Europe plunged into war, Asia had already been burning for 2 years. Yet few in the West understood that the war in China was not a regional conflict. It was the opening act of the Second World War itself. When Japan invaded French Indochina in 1940, the United States finally imposed sanctions, freezing Japanese assets and cutting off oil supplies. Japan's response came on December 7, 1941, with the attack on Pearl Harbor. For America, World War II had just begun. For China, it had already been raging for 4 long years. After Japan's defeat in 1945, Shanghai slowly rose from the ashes. But the scars never vanished. Today, beneath the modern skyline of glass and steel, traces of the old battle remain: bullet holes in colonial walls, rusted bunkers hidden behind new highways. The city remembers, even when the world forgets. Because it was here, in 1937, that the modern world first witnessed total war. Aerial bombardment of cities, chemical weapons, civilians slaughtered without mercy. It was a dress rehearsal for everything that would follow. Warsaw, London, Hiroshima. Historians often say World War II began in 1939 with the invasion of Poland. But for Asia, for a quarter of humanity, it began in Shanghai. The flames that consumed its streets in 1937 would ignite a chain reaction that led to Nanjing, Pearl Harbor, and eventually the world's descent into the deadliest conflict in human history. As historian Rana Mitter wrote, China was the first Allied power to fight the Axis. Its people fought alone for years, with little help, driven by nothing but survival and the hope that the world would someday notice their suffering. Shanghai burned, Nanjing blood, and the world watched in silence. The ruins of Shanghai have long since been rebuilt, its skyline now one of the most modern on Earth. Yet behind every shining tower lies a story written in smoke and blood. The war that began with a missing soldier and a bridge outside Beijing unleashed a chain of events that would consume the globe. The Marco Polo Bridge, the Battle of Shanghai, the rape of Nanjing. Each was a chapter in humanity's descent, and in its eventual awakening. Because from those ashes rose the conviction that such horror must never be allowed again. But history, as it often does, waits for the world to forget. One Shanghai burned Japan's brutal invasion that shocked the world. A story not of victory or defeat, but of how a single spark, ignored by the world, set the entire century ablaze.